In other news out of Washington today, the Obama administration did an about-face on the Defense of Marriage Act. This is known as DOMA, announcing the Justice Department will no longer defend the controversial 1996 law that defines marriage as between one man and one woman. Now, in recent years, there have been several challenges to the constitutionality of the law. Most recently, a Massachusetts court ruled in July 2010 that DOMA violates equal protection as guaranteed by the Fifth Amendment. In short, today's decision means that no more federal resources will be expended to defend DOMA going forward. And of course, as you can imagine, the gay rights community is ecstatic. Our inboxes were filled with dozens of statements, including this one from Empire State Pride Agenda Executive Director Ross Levi. He says, DOMA was an unfair attack on loving same-sex couples and our families, and a further obstacle placed on legally married same-sex couples who reside in New York and elsewhere. We are inspired to redouble our efforts here in New York, working with Governor Cuomo and the state legislature to allow same-sex couples to marry here in our home state. Now, joining me to discuss this development is Assemblyman Danny Odonnell. He's a Manhattan Democrat and has been carrying the gay marriage bill in his House for several years now. Assemblyman, thanks for your time.
Pleasure to be here, Liz.
Before we get to gay marriage in New York and what this ruling might mean, were you surprised by this ruling? Because the Obama administration has been a little bit criticized by the gay community for moving slowly on issues that matter particularly to these voters.
Well, all communities, when they're faced with their own lives, want progress right away.
Sure.
They want immediate results. And so there's frustration regardless of who the people are. Certainly among the gay community, we certainly wanted more progress more quickly. In this particular case, it was pretty clear the Defense of Marriage Act was going to come down. Either standard you apply, either the rational basis or the higher scrutiny test, it's hard to make a defense of the Defense of Marriage Act. And so I'm happy to hear the President of the Justice Department has finally figured out that it's wrong for us to spend our resources defending such a ridiculously thought-out law.
Not to be too terribly cynical, but of course we are heading into a presidential election year. The election will be in 2012. The president is still struggling personally with his position, according to his spokesman, on the question of legalizing same-sex marriage. Do you see this as a precursor to him moving forward to finally getting there?
Well, whether he gets there or not doesn't matter as much to me as whether or not I get there. And I get to get there by getting a marriage license. And the truth is that the question of who is allowed to get married has always been left to the states. The Defense of Marriage Act went outside that rubric and said, we, the federal government, will tell you states who has the right to get married and not get married. So now we have a circumstance where people from different parts of the state have the right to get a marriage license from their state, and yet their federal government says, we don't recognize it. That's just plain wrong. And so if the president is willing to say that that's just plain wrong, that's a very good first step towards allowing us in New York and in other places throughout the country to allow our local states to decide who should get married. And I am, for one, looking forward to my marriage license.
So we actually should be clear. I mean, what this means, it's not, it doesn't preclude Congress, if members of Congress so desire, from appointing attorneys and spending resources to get involved in this battle, nor does it preclude any other outside interest from getting involved. I mean, it's not going to end the legal fight over the question of whether same-sex couples should be able to marry. There's a number of fights that have been going on in New York for a while now, isn't that right?
Well, the Defense of Marriage Act would never do that. They never have the power to do that. The power to decide who gets a marriage license is up to the individual states. I was the plaintiff in the lawsuit in New York that said the New York Constitution should require that I be given a marriage license. The Court of Appeals said no in a very bad decision, a brilliant dissent by Judge Kaye, and thankfully I had the smartest lawyer in New York, Robbie Kaplan, and they turned around and said you must go to the legislature, which ironically I was a member of. So I said, okay, I know what I need to do now to move this forward. However, the Defense of Marriage Act is strictly about the federal recognition of those marriages. And the federal government has never played a role in deciding who could or could not get married. Obviously, when you go back as far as Mildred Loving and Loving v. Virginia, where the Supreme Court threw out Virginia's laws that banned interracial marriages, certain bans by states can be unconstitutional, but the question of how old you have to be, how many degrees of separation you have to be, all those questions have always been left to the states. The Defense Marriage Act ended that respect for the state's decision-making, this would not force gay marriage on anyone. It would just permit the individual states to make the individual decision, which they've always done.
So Governor Cuomo has said on several occasions now that he is going to make a priority of legalizing same-sex marriage. This is something that he said during the campaign. He has said it since. You have carried this bill. The Assembly has passed it 3 times. It died in the Senate once and has never come back. What can you tell us about the status? Have you spoken at all to the administration, and when might we see a program bill?
I'm not sure when we will see a program bill. Yes, I've had some very good conversations with members of the Cuomo administration, and I believe that Andrew Cuomo is a very committed person to this subject matter. I mean, when I talk about it with people, it's the people who are opposed to my marriage rights are yesterday's politicians, not tomorrow's leaders, and Andrew Cuomo is a tomorrow leader kind of guy. And so I think that he's interested in using the force of his office to help move this forward, and I expect that we will have a programming bill soon, and I certainly expect that we in the Assembly will pass it once again. Okay,
but the Senate, what about the Senate?
Well, the Senate is the Senate, and, you know, there's a very small majority. I mean, you know, I don't think there are 32 votes in the Senate to say that today is Wednesday, right, Liz?
That's
so
true.
In the end, you need 32 votes to get anything done. They have not had a lot of success in getting things done. What you need is a competent sponsor who knows how to count, who knows how to deliver votes, and you need to know whether or not the majority leader is going to put bills on the floor that he personally doesn't support.
Well, now
so
we have
those questions I don't know.
Right. Well, now, of course, the Republicans are back in power, and Dean Skelos says he's willing to let it come to the floor, but in terms of a competent sponsor who can count, I don't see any Republicans stepping up to the plate anytime soon.
Well, that's not quite what he said, Liz. What he said was if his conference wants to, he'll let it happen.
That's true.
So what does that mean? That means in the behind closed doors, they take a vote about whether or not it's politically expedient to allow me to be treated equally by my government. So in the end, whether or not, in the years that I've been here, not a single, in Republican-controlled Senate, not a single Democratic bill of importance has ever come to the floor. Not a single bill carried by a Democratic sponsor has ever come to the floor. If Dean Skelos wants to make believe that he's not going to run the place that way, I'm happy to hear that. In the end, obviously this is an issue of great importance. The polling is now with us. For those Republican senators on Long Island, there are districts on Long Island where 70% of the voters firmly believe in my right to equality. It is about time that that is reflected in how they vote. And so it's my hope that the bill does come to the floor, but I have no idea how Dean Skelos intends to run his House.
Well, we shall see. In the meantime, Assemblyman O'Donnell, I really want to thank you for joining us tonight. It's good to see you. We'll see you soon in Albany.
Be well, Liz. Thank you very much.